Hey, what's up YouTube? My name is Cass, back at you again with yet another video, and this time around we're talking about, does gear matter in photography? So I started my photography career almost 4 years ago, and by some standards that makes me a professional, but I prefer to label myself as a lifelong learner in this industry. And I'm always challenging myself to shoot differently, think a bit more creatively in the shoots that I engage in, and just be more intentional about the types of shots that I take. Now, what do I mean by shooting a bit more intentionally? Well, just recently I had some shoots, boudoir and another one, an event at a brewery. And both of those shoots were challenging in their own ways. But everything about those shoots made me feel like I had the shot or multiple shots of value. And you can check out some of the final images from both of those shoots at my portfolio, and the link, of course, is always in the description below. But after posting some of these images on Instagram, I started getting DMs asking what did I shoot with. So I'm gonna get into that. So I'm not the type of photographer who chases the latest gear to shoot with. Now, trust me when I say I used to be, and this was very early in my career when I was trying to determine what's the best camera, how can I get the best shots. I followed the blogs and the videos on different types of cameras, and I really got involved in the brand wars, you know, the Sony versus Canon, which was better, which had better color science, and ultimately I determined that it was Canon. And so I really tried my hardest to save up for the best Canon camera at the time. And every video I'd watch would just talk about how great it was compared to Sony. So for me, that was enough justification to want to put all my eggs in one basket and go Team Canon. But I always had priorities or obligations that would come up that really kept me from saving as much as I could for that Canon camera. And Canon cameras aren't cheap, of course. They kind of range from $2,000 up. And that for me is certainly a lot of money. Being a grad student, it's not something that I had in my back pocket to go and spend. So what I was able to afford was a Canon Rebel T5i. So the Canon T5i is a solid entry-level camera, as you can see in my hand here. It has a nice, coarse, gritty texture to it, which gives it a nice, easy grip. And so it really helped me get into photography, and it got the job done. At this point, they're really easy to find and cheap. You can probably catch them on the Buy Nothing pages floating around too. But 3-4 years ago, that camera was a big deal to me, really huge. And so I even bought a telephoto lens and a 50mm prime to go with it. And that was the extent of my budget. Compared to cameras now, the T5i doesn't really stand a chance. The specs really aren't advanced. It doesn't even shoot 4K, which a lot of videographers or cinematographers look for, but I wasn't focused on video so much back then, so that didn't really matter. You know, I really tried my hardest to shoot quality pictures from a really cheap camera. And really learning how to shoot quality pictures started with me knowing how to expose for my environment and also exposing for different skin tones. And the latter especially is important to me because I didn't want to leave out clients who honestly looked like me. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw the exposure triangle for those of you who are visual learners like I am. Please pardon the atrocious drawing, but this should help you visualize exactly what I'm talking about. So on the left-hand side, you have AP or aperture, SS, shutter speeds on the right, ISO on the bottom. So with aperture, that's defined by f-stops on your camera. So f1.2, for example, and f22. The lower your f-stop, the brighter the image. The higher the f-stop numerically, the darker your image. And it could help to think of it in that way. With ISO, the amount of noise, the lower the ISO number, the darker the image. The higher the ISO number, the brighter the image, but that also means you're introducing more noise or a sort of graininess to your image. And with shutter speed, the smaller your number, the more of a fraction, the darker your image. The more the number becomes a whole number, the brighter your image. And so shutter speed controls blur as well. So if you're going towards more of a whole number, you're introducing blurry movement. If you're going towards more fractions or a smaller number, you're freezing the movement. With AP or aperture, the smaller your f-stop, the shallow depth of field, and you get things like a bokeh effect where you get to blur your background. And the bigger your f-stop, the deeper depth of field, so you get to see the whole image clearly. Knowing this, I push myself to shoot more in manual versus auto mode so that I can learn my camera. And then I also made sure that I practiced with the different lenses that I had to really know and understand focal length, how it factored into the exposure triangle. And I was able to add in factors like lighting and composition with that understanding of the exposure triangle. That really helped me become better and also be able to shoot different skin tones properly. But when you're shooting different skin tones, specifically clients of deeper, darker skin tones, it's more than just the exposure triangle and different lightings. You also have to factor in undertones and reflectivity. And so there are two ways to find out the undertones of a person. The first way is pretty simple, you just ask them. But if you have someone who just doesn't know what their undertone is, the second option is to do a wrist check. If you have someone with greenish veins, like I do here, they have a warm undertone. And if you have someone with purplish, bluish, they have more of a cool undertone. And for veins that you can't really see or identify on the person, they have more of a neutral undertone. Curating light sources to deeper skin tones can't happen without having a reflective base. The easiest way to get a reflective base is to have someone wear shiny makeup or even a moisturizer of some sort, something that really helps their skin seem a lot shinier than usual. And if you have a client with more of an oily skin type, well, that makes your job a little bit easier, but you also have to be cognizant of the fact that you don't want too much shine. And why reflectivity is important is because the surface area of the light is what we want emphasized, not so much the intensity of a light. So you don't want to brighten the light source for a darker skinned client because that just may wash them out or even reflect too much. And again, going back to the example of if you have a client with more of an oily skin base, it would not look very flattering. You also want to make sure that you use a polarizer because it helps shape the light a lot more nicely as well on deeper skin tones. So I've had my T5i for going on 4 years now, but I've gotten to the point where, I've identified that it's time for me to make the switch and to upgrade. And so what I'm recording on today is what I've upgraded to. It's the Fujifilm X-T4. As I've developed my artist praxis, my style, I've really leaned into wanting to know the best camera to really emphasize that. And I didn't want to so much go towards brand identity, even though yes, brands are important, but it wasn't so much the brand that drew me into Fujifilm as it was what it had to offer. And so I really like that it's a film-based camera, which is the direction that I'm moving my career towards. But I really like that it's a film-based camera. It has a lot of cool film simulations that I get to play with when I shoot. And also it's really dynamic in the color that it offers. And the color science I think is really neat. Plus it doesn't hurt that Fujifilms in general are more affordable than Sony or Canon. Switching to Fujifilm was kind of jarring for me. It's totally different the way that it works. It's much more mechanical than I'm used to, but I also appreciate that fact. So to answer the question I posed before, does gear matter in photography? Yes, it does, asterisk. Gear certainly does help with image quality. You get a lot more specs to play with, to use. You certainly get some new fancy buttons to press, and you get access to things like 4K video if that's something that you're into. But if you don't have an understanding of the gear that you use, even if it's a smartphone, or have an understanding of how to use it in different scenarios, regardless of what gear that you use, you're not gonna get the best pictures. And photography, yes, it is certainly very subjective, but what isn't subjective is the quality of images. If you run into anyone who's telling you gear is everything, or go team Canon, go team Sony, I challenge you to think a bit differently and probably question why it is that they're telling you to do that. You certainly, yes, want to take into account the gear that you use. However, gear is only a piece of photography. It's the skills, it's the time, it's the dedication that you take to the craft in order to master your skills that make the gear seem so good. So I hope this video really helped answer that question for you. Does gear matter in photography? Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I post every 2 weeks with new topics to really help you expand on your photography career, and also to get in-depth look at what the photography journey is. Again, I'm Cass. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.